Thank you, Mark. Well, let's jump right into it. But just a few contextualizing notes about our panel. I mentioned before, I'm Director of Academic Affairs at KEI, and as part of that role, I am the managing editor of our flagship journal, Korea Policy, which aims to bring academic and scholarly research in conjunction with sort of direct policy relevance to the analysis and policy recommendations as well. And tonight's two panels feature discussions on 4 papers that will later be published in the spring issue of Korea Policy in mid-May. And as has been alluded to, the objective of tonight's 2 panels and the issue itself is to take a critical look at recent developments in trilateral relations between the US, Japan, and South Korea, and in particular, look at some of the commitments that were made at the Camp David Summit in August of 2023, what has developed since then, although it has not been a very long time. What are some concrete areas that the 3 can or should deepen cooperation in? And of course, what are some obstacles and challenges to making progress in that regard? And more specifically, the first panel, which I will moderate, is about trilateral security cooperation, both in relation to North Korea, but also the broader region, often referred to as the Indo-Pacific these days. And the second panel will look at trilateral cooperation around the issues of economic security, emerging technologies, and development finance. I will just briefly note, for those interested, our last 2 Korea policy issues focused on the issues of economic security and the Indo-Pacific. We see this terminology all the time these days. It's often cited, but what is meant by economic security or the Indo-Pacific as a concept is very different if you're sitting in Washington or in Tokyo or in Jakarta or in Beijing or in Seoul. And so our authors in those respective issues did their best to unpack what those concepts and ideas were from these respective national perspectives. And those are available on KEI's website. Just a few housekeeping notes. This first panel will run until 6:30, after which we'll have a 10-minute break for our second panel to set up, which will end at about 7:55. And then we will have a catered dinner afterwards. So please stick around. It's a good opportunity to chat with panelists and discussants and to further the conversation. I suspect about 20 or 30 undergraduates will arrive about 20 minutes before the end of the second panel, if they're doing their job. And I have to say, I'm very honored to share the stage with such a group of experts. We've put longer bios of theirs on the event website, so I won't go through all of it now. But just briefly, to the far right of me is our discussant, Dr. Jeffrey Hornung, who's the Japan lead of the National Security Research Division and senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation. To his immediate left is Dr. Sakata Yasuyo, who's professor at Kanda University of International Studies. And to my right is Dr. Alex Soo-Hoon Lee, Associate Research Fellow at the Korea Institute for Defense Analysis, or KIDA. And I want to thank all of you for flying into Seattle from parts, well, all far, some from further than others, to join us for our panel tonight. And I've asked each of our 2 panelists, Dr. Lee first, to give 12 to 15 minutes of sort of key takeaways from their papers, each in order. Dr. Hornung will give his response thereafter. We want to give our panelists an opportunity to respond to Dr. Hornung's comments, and then we'll open things up to a Q&A, and I may lob a question or 2 as a moderator's privilege at the start of that. But then we'll open it up to you, our audience, both here and online as well. So without further ado, Dr. Lee.
Thank you. Thank you very much, KEI and Vice President Kola and also Dr. Clint for giving us an opportunity to speak in front of the panel. And also thank you very much, Dr. Ha, for inviting us to this beautiful campus and the room at University of Washington. So I'm going to talk about the trilateral security cooperation among ROK, US, Japan, but some people say US, Korea, Japan. Some people say Japan, Korea, US, but I'm from South Korea, so it will be ROK, US, Japan trilateral cooperation. So The ROK-US Japan Trilateral Security Cooperation accounts for 1/3 of the world economy, and all three are ranked number 10, top 10 in the military power. In their Indo-Pacific strategies, they have emphasized the importance of trilateral cooperation. As Mr. Tokola said, since ROK President Yoon Suk-yeol bold move to normalize relations with Japan, trilateral security has been officially declared at Camp David in last August. Trilateral security cooperation is not a recent trend, but a consistent effort made over the last couple of decades. The first attempt dates back to the Lyndon Johnson administration. When China tested its atomic bomb in 1964, President Johnson emphasized that the U.S. would maintain readiness toward China to defend its allies in the region. When the ROK and Japan signed the Treaty on Basic Relations in the following year, 1965, President Johnson welcomed the two allies who were closely working together. I see this as the first effort to establish a trilateral cooperation. A TCOC, Trilateral Coordination and Oversight Group, was another notable trilateral mechanism promoted in the 1990s. After the Daepodong missile DPRK launched in 1998, the three nations agreed to conduct negotiations with the DPRK under the framework agreed upon by the three. After North Korea conducted its third nuclear test in 2013, the three signed the TISA in 2014. TISA was an information sharing arrangement among the three. What the three leaders discussed at Camp David transcends the scope and scale of the TCOC and TISA. To maintain peace and prosperity in the Korean Peninsula and the Indo-Pacific region, it will be critical to plan the future of the trilateral cooperation and carry on the legacy that began at Camp David. So I believe the trilateral security cooperation has set up a new security architecture in the Indo-Pacific region and the Korean Peninsula. At Camp David, three documents have been produced. The spirit of Camp David is a joint statement that captures the role and policy direction of the cooperation. Camp David principles set basic principles to promote cooperation. The three leaders also agreed to a commitment to consult. The main objectives of the cooperation discussed at Camp David can be divided into global, regional, and peninsular. First, the three leaders declared that trilateral cooperation would not be limited to the Korean Peninsula or the region, but would also cover the globe. The three members of the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, agreed to a world without nuclear weapons, and as permanent and non-permanent members of the UNSC Security Council, they expressed their respect for the spirit and the Charter of the United Nations. Second, at the regional level, while maintaining the rules-based order, the three nations will closely work with ASEAN and Pacific Island countries. All three nations in the Pacific strategies claim the importance of trilateral cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. The three agreed to work with ASEAN in the areas of sustainable energy, water security. The three would also work with Pacific Island countries. China and the Solomon Islands recently have upgraded their relations to a comprehensive strategic partnership and have signed a cooperation pact. As for strengthening the rules-based order, the three criticized the PRC's unlawful maritime claims and reaffirmed the importance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. Third, trilateral cooperation will focus on deterring DPRK threats and will work towards denuclearization of Korean Peninsula. North Korea conducted more than 70 missile launch tests in 2022. The three nations reasserted their commitment to the complete denuclearization of DPRK. In doing so, they will work through the United Nations to push the DPRK to abandon their nuclear and ballistic missile programs. To deter DPRK provocations effectively, the three set goals to operationalize sharing of missile warning data on the DPRK in real time by the end of the 2023. They also agreed to conduct dialogues with the DPRK with no precondition. It has been about a year, half a year, since the Camp David summit meeting took place. Among the various agendas, here are the key commitments. First, as all three are exposed to DPRK's nuclear and missile threats, deterring these threats and denuclearization of DPRK has been the priority. Criticize DPRK's numerous military provocations, the three leaders set goals to complete the system of sharing missile sharing data on the DPRK in real time by the end of 2023. Second, the three nations have committed to stand strong against PRC to protect rules-based order and promote peace and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific region. They opposed PRC's attempts to illegal maritime territory claims, militarization of reclaimed areas. Moreover, they firmly commit to freedom of navigation and overflight in the South China Sea. For the first time, the three leaders are committed to deterring any activities that could threaten the security landscape of the Taiwan Strait. Third, the three nations agreed to a commitment to consult. It is a two-paragraph document that explains the way for the cooperation. To accomplish the objectives and protect Indo-Pacific values, the three leaders emphasized that information sharing, synchronization of messages, and coordination of responses must be carried out. Although it differs from the concept of collective security in NATO, commitment to consult could serve as a guideline for the three in promoting cooperation. Fourth, the three leaders have committed to open annual meetings at various levels and conduct annual military exercises. The three leaders would hold annual summit meetings, meetings for the foreign ministers, defense ministers, and heads of the NSC, National Security Council, as well as the annual Indo-Pacific dialogue. It is difficult to find cases where multilateral meetings like take on an annual basis. The three leaders have also agreed to build multi-domain trilateral exercises regularly to enhance the three's coordinated capabilities and cooperation. A multi-domain trilateral exercise would enhance joint capability and the interoperability of the three forces. Lastly, the three nations have agreed to promote space security. The three leaders decided to provide forums for dialogue to promote trilateral cooperation on space security. The three can work on the area of non-traditional security areas, such as space debris removal. On a traditional security front, military cooperation can be done in the area of launching and maintaining reconnaissance satellites. It has been a little over a year since the Camp David summit. Some agendas have been making meaningful progress, while others haven't. First, the three's cooperation with DPRK has made partial progress. The three nations officially activated the mechanism of sharing DPRK missile warning data in real time in mid-December. Although the scope and level of information that they share are unknown at this point, it is both technically and politically a big achievement of the trilateral cooperation. Second, regarding the PRC, trilateral cooperation has not made much progress. The trilateral cooperation could be assessed once the threats are posed by the PRC in the Taiwan Strait or South China Sea. Third, progress has been made in holding annual meetings. Three defense ministers met recently in Brazil to talk about DPRK's growing threat. The three leaders of the NSC also met last December to discuss the combined exercises and respective schedules. The inaugural trilateral Indo-Pacific dialogue took place also in U.S. in January. They condemned DPRK's development of nuclear missile technologies and expressed the importance of stability and peace in the Taiwan Strait. They also discussed the importance of cooperation with ASEAN and Pacific Island countries. Fourth, combined military exercises have been conducted. The most recent one took place in the South China Sea. The most recent one took place in the southeast of the Jeju Island. Here, three navies conducted joint maritime exercises. The ROK in Japan sent Aegis, and U.S. sent Carl Vinson to this exercise to strengthen the defense posture for the DPRK's increasing level of threat. Fifth, regarding space cooperation, the ROK and Japanese military participated the Global Sentinel, which took place at the Vandenberg Air Force Base in early February. I would like to propose the areas where more concrete cooperation should occur. First of all, the three nations should invest more in multi-domain trilateral military exercise as the three leaders agreed at Camp David. For the last 7 months, two trilateral aerial exercises and one naval exercise took place. However, to strengthen the interoperability of the three militaries, trilateral multi-domain exercises, including the ground exercise, are expected to conducted at some point. Second, the three should work to upgrade the real-time sharing of missile warning data on the DPRK. When the DPRK launched Inter-Regional Ballistic Missile (IRBM) in January, the data analysis from ROK US militaries and Japanese self-defense force were different. They should work on the communications and also troubleshoot the ways to improve the mechanism through the consistent open communication. Third, the three nations should closely work together within the United Nations to promote peace and prosperity in the region and the world. Though ROK and Japan have been elected as non-permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, in this venue, the three nations should be calling for the complete, verifiable, and irreversible dismantlement, in other words, CVID of North Korea's nuclear program. They can use their diplomatic powers to prepare initiatives that will lead like-minded countries in the United Nations in a direction to keep the peace and stability of the peninsula. Some challenges may stand in the way of progress of the cooperation. First, China-Russia DPRK trilateral cooperation, the so-called Northern Triangle, could work against the ROK US-Japan trilateral cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. If formed, it may deter the liberal international order or rules-based order led by the ROK US-Japan. Second, domestic politics is also a critical variable. On the US side, although the trilateral security cooperation is likely to continue under any administration, it could be affected to a degree. On the Japanese side, if Prime Minister Kishida's approval rate continues to fall, there is a chance that the trilateral cooperation could be affected as well. These elections may affect the trilateral cooperation to a degree. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that the most significant value of trilateral cooperation is, for now, sustainability. In this respect, it will be desirable to establish the ROK US Japan Secretariat. And here are the reasons for that. First, in the changing security landscape and domestic politics, the Secretariat can manage to hold three nations together. Most renowned multilateral frameworks such as NATO and ASEAN run secretariat functions as well. Second, the secretariat functions as a planning board that coordinates the annual summit and ministerial meetings will be important as well. Third, the secretariat can manage the logistics and schedule of trilateral exercises. Here, each government can deploy liaison officers to a secret secretariat. Fourth, the secretary should review the results of meetings and exercise to improve them. This function should also work as watchdog as well. Lastly, the Secretariat should also be able to present new areas of cooperation. It should function as a research and development that provides new ideas. That's it for now, and I'll welcome any comments and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. I want to pass things right over to your Japanese counterpart for her view on the Japanese perspective of trilateral relations.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I would also like to convey my appreciation to for inviting me to this seminar, and to KEI and the VV, Mr. Tokola, and also Clint for organizing this, as well as the host of the University of Washington and Professor Ha of the Korean Studies Center. And I know this university has a very famous good Asian studies program. So you're very famous for that. And also it's my first time in Seattle, but good food and good coffee and among other things. So, okay. So before I make my formal remarks, one more point about something about the future generation and this trilateral. At the Camp David Summit, the three leaders, Mr. Biden, Mr. Yoon, and Mr. Kishida, agreed to hold a youth summit First time, Trilateral Youth Summit. And the first one will be held in Busan in July. And news reports say that 1,100 applicants were there for 50 seats. Okay. So it kind of shows you how much interest there is in well, this trilateral, as well as for the Indo-Pacific really. And because, well, among the 50, 15 each from US, Korea, and Japan, but there's 5 more seats left. And that's also actually for Southeast Asian countries, as well as Pacific Island countries. So this trilateral is becoming a kind of another platform for the Indo-Pacific engagements in this world. So, and it also, focuses on, well, traditional security issues as well, but also climate change, gender empowerment, economic and energy cooperation. And so there's a lot of new issues that the 3 countries have to face with other partners in the Indo-Pacific. So it's amazing that, there's so many, next generation thinkers that are interested in the trilateral in the Pacific. And so we owe it to the future generation to think about the present for the future. And that is what this conference is for. So my comments will be twofold. First is, so where the trilateral is now, give it a historical context a little bit, and the present about the Camp David. And second, again, like Alex, some suggestions for the way ahead in the future, focusing on defense cooperation, which is the subject of this panel. So I agree with Dr. Lee or Alex, if I may, I think we're on the same page as a trilateral, that it's significant, Camp David is significant and all that. And but I will go a little bit further to open up some new avenues for discussion, since I'm not too constrained as because I'm not in a government think tank, so I can maybe speak a little freer. But they will be my comments and thinking. So first of all, on the where the trilateral is now, so I would go back a little further than Alex and say that the origins of the trilateral are in the Korean War, and we have a long history. It's about 70 years really, and Japan is committed to Korean security through the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty that we have, but also under the United Nations Command, UNC. It's been around for over 70 years, and it's based on the Korean Armistice. And so Japan still hosts the UNC, what we call UNC Rear, in Yokota Air Base. And President Yoon's, South Korean President Yoon's comments last year at the Korean Armistice commemorations that we had reminded us to not forget about Japan. The Japan factor is there to think in the Korean security context as well. But trilateral cooperation today, as Alex has said, is started in the post-Cold War period. It is a tenuous relationship because up and down all the time, but it was always pushed by our US ally to cooperate amongst each other. And so the first push or first boost, so to speak, was in the 1990s, as Alex said, during the Clinton administration, where we had the first North Korean nuclear crisis. So we were like laser focused on that with the agreed framework, the TCOG, as he said, and also KEDO, the Korean Energy Development Organization. We all had that. So that really kind of put us together. The second opportunity was in the 2010s with the Obama administration's pivot to Asia or rebalance. And but at that time, the trilateral itself focused on the North Korean nuclear missile program. And we really focused on nuclear deterrence and extended deterrence at that time. And so we didn't really address the China issue as a trilateral. But now, in the 2020s now, it's the Indo-Pacific, it's Camp David, and so we are much more aligned, not only North Korea, but with on the Indo-Pacific, which includes China, but not only China issues. So Camp David is the third opportunity to revitalize this trilateral. And there's a proverb in Japanese, "Sandome no shojiki," which means maybe 3 times lucky, I guess. In English, it doesn't quite translate, but it means that you fail twice but succeed the third time, right? Third time's a charm, yes, okay. And so, but the essence is not being lucky. About being lucky, it's about, whether you make that effort to succeed or not. So that's what we're being tested on. And it does not negate the fourth or the fifth time, by the way. So Camp David Summit is, as Alex said, historic, significant, and so don't take it lightly. Okay. It is the first standalone, only the 3 leaders together summit, because the first one actually was in 1994 when at APEC. So they only met at other conferences. So this was the first one to meet together at Camp David. So it took 30 years, okay, to have a standalone summit. So that's historic. So we've come a long way. But also right now we are finally strategically aligned on what we call the Indo-Pacific. And so from North Korea to beyond to Indo-Pacific issues, which includes China, as well as Russia and the Ukraine war and all that. So we're all strategically aligned, finally. And it also includes not just defense and military, but it also includes the economic and technology security, and also developmental cooperation, which will be discussed in the second panel. So we have a lot to do with the trilateral. And so, the Camp David agreement is pretty impressive. Okay, so if you're interested, you could read back on that. But in defense and security, though, we need to figure out still the balance between how much eggs do we put in the basket of North Korea, Korean Peninsula, and also the so-called Indo-Pacific issues, which usually tend to focus on maritime security issues, sea lane security, South China Sea, Taiwan, and all that. So, we still have to figure out, we have the old, Korean Peninsula legacy but present issue, and then we have the new maritime security issue, and we have to put the old and the new wine in a new bottle. So it's we have a lot of big tasks to make. Now, so where we should go. So now that we have Camp David, how much further can we go, or should we go? That's the task right now. And I will just focus on the defense corporation, the institutionalization of this defense corporation, make it more formal, so to speak. Because another key feature of the Camp David Summit is not just strategic alignment, but as Alex said, it's about institutionalization, it's about regularization of our cooperation. So where and how can we make this progress on that? So there's actually a lot going on with the 3 countries in terms of like joint defense exercises, trilaterally and multilaterally. We practically, the 3 militaries meet everywhere in the Pacific, in RIMPAC, Cobra Gold, Pacific Vanguard, you name it, they all meet all the time. Okay? But it's been ad hoc, it's not systematic. And so it becomes vulnerable to changes in the political leadership. So that's what we're trying to fix here after Camp David, because we need to let the militaries do their jobs, more consistently, okay, without all the political intervention. So in the paper, I examined the institutionalization of bilateral defense ties with Japan and other countries, where we're at right now, and what I call, I'm trying to call it quasi alliances, but still trying to figure that out. But in any case, I picked up the bilateral ties because trilaterals can go only as far as bilaterals go. And despite what the US, Japan, Korea do in exercises, Korea, Japan is at such a low level of institutionalization that we need to fix it. And so it lags behind others, especially compared to the Japan, Australia one. That's really the model case for the Indo-Pacific. We have, for Japan-Australia, it's we have a second joint security declaration, 2022. We already have the information security agreement. We have a revised AXA, which is a logistical cooperation agreement, and a new RAA, a reciprocal access agreement, which is an equivalent to a status of forces agreement for base visits between military personnel. Okay, so and this is the first for Japan actually to sign one besides the United States. So it's changing. Japan's changing. And so what there's many other cases, including UK, Canada, Germany, Philippines, which is we're having a U.S. Japan Philippine trilateral next month when Kishida-san will visit Washington. So anyway, but for the trilateral, this trilateral, adding on to what Alex-san said, I'll focus on defense agreements. So if we're going to regularize joint exercises as agreed to the Camp David, we need to institutionalize cooperation more so they can work, the militaries can work more, consistently. And so I'll highlight 3 items. One is the policy documents and guidelines. We need a compass to guide the policy officials and military officials. And some people advocate a joint security declaration between Korea and Japan, but I think that's too high. But next year will be 2025 will be the 60th anniversary of the Korea-Japan normalization. And, I think they're all going for a Korea-Japan joint declaration, comprehensive joint declaration. The last one we had was 1998 between Kim Dae-jung and Obuchi-san. So we're trying to revise that. So a Korea-Japan comprehensive, declaration, but with the defense section in it. But we also have a defense, a memorandum of defense exchanges in 2009, actually, which nobody notices. So we need to upgrade that a little bit. So some kind of policy document. And also we need, number 2 is we do have a GSAMIA, Korea-Japan GSAMIA. But I think we need to go at least plus AXA, logistical cooperation, which was discussed 2010s. But because in order to regularize exercise, you need to have a more stable institutional, foundations for that. And maybe, well, RAA's reciprocal access agreements might be a little bit too high a hurdle for Korea, Japan, because it's a very sensitive issue. But we do have the UNC, so maybe kind of revitalize that a little bit. Last part is the Defense Tech Corporation, which is also another sensitive issue, but we're talking about defense supply chains and all that. So maybe Japan and Korea will meet in what the U.S. is trying to build a defense supply chain in the Indo-Pacific. So maybe we can learn from each other there. But lastly, capacity building assistance toward third countries like Southeast Asia, Pacific Islands. We can cooperate and align and coordinate our policies there. So I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasuyo. That's really good, very brass tacks mechanisms for ways to advance this, albeit some of them potentially controversial. Dr. Hornung, I want to give you the opportunity to give your critical feedback to both papers, and then we'll enter more of a conversation.
Thank you. Let me begin by like my fellow speakers here, thanking KEI and University of Washington Center for Korea Studies for this opportunity. My role here, for those of you who might not have seen what discussants do, is I've read their papers. And so I will be providing comments. Some of them will ring true because you've heard them speak about it. Some of them are very specific to the papers, but it gives you a sense of some of the sausage making to how journals and articles get published. So let me begin by stressing that reading both of these papers really reminded me of how historic the current initiatives in the Trilat cooperation or how the relationship is. Both of the authors here did a real excellent job of tying today's efforts with their historical antecedents. Both also did a great job of condensing a lot of details from these agreements into some of their finer points so that we can make sense of really what's occurring today and why it's important. And finally, both provided some recommendations for how all three countries should consider moving forward. And it gives academics, think tankers, policymakers, gives everyone a roadmap of things to consider in the months and years ahead to try to make this trilateralism work. Now, aside from these very strong positive aspects, let me provide some thoughts on areas where I think the authors should revisit to try to strengthen their arguments as they revise the papers. And let me start with two comments that I think apply for both of you equally. The first is the timeline. Both of you provide timelines of historical experiences with trilateralism. Alex, if you start with the 1960s, then you focus on the 1990s, 2000s, and then today. Sakata-san, you really focus a lot on the 1990s, 2010s, and today. You do refer to various times in the Cold War, as you did in your remarks, but really it's starting with the 1990s as the first. So these timelines are different. Now, it's okay that you both have different timelines. We don't have to have the exact timelines, but I think it would help readers to understand more, to explain the criteria for what defines a period as a period. Why are you focusing on one period? What qualifies that to be trilateralism versus another? And so just trying to better understand what marks the beginning and what marks the end. Because I think we need a better understanding of these periods. Are they comparable really to one another? Or are they simply evolutionary steps along a single trajectory that they're events that needed to happen for the trilateralism to occur later? But importantly, I think for both your papers, they both could benefit by providing more details on what worked in the trilateralism in those earlier stages. What worked and why, but importantly, why did trilateralism fail? Why did it stop? Because one of the things that your papers, I think, when you get to the recommendations, we really want to know what lessons can we draw from the past to try to help learn what's going to happen this time. And so you both focus on history. So just having a better sense of those lessons that we can learn from that help inform the current initiatives. And so in other words, just trying to use those historical examples that both you provide to help contextualize your discussion more. The second issue that I think you both could think about a little bit more is how you both talk about China. Both papers touch on China in various ways, but what's largely left untouched in both of your discussions is whether all three countries share an equal threat perception about China. I raise this because in my world, in the policy world, we often hear people question whether all three countries look at China in the same way. And for instance, whether South Korea views China as a threat in the same way that Japan views China as a threat. I think you don't have to go into a lot of detail on that, but just a simple paragraph. What do the countries think about China in terms of threat perceptions? Okay, now having said that, let me go into the comments for each of your specific papers, and let me start with Alex. I've already mentioned the strengths at the beginning, so let me go through some of the areas specifically where I think you could revisit. Let me start with the accomplishments section. The broad thought here is I think it could benefit from a little bit of tightening up. In the first section of the paper, you state the accomplishments of the three agreements, and then you go into the details of those three agreements in subsequent pages. I really think that there's some overlap, reiteration in some of that discussion. I would suggest looking over this, trying to summarize a little bit more, trying to tighten it up, because right now it's a very long it's focusing on a reframing of facts. But when I read this and knowing both of your expertise, I think it would be really beneficial to learn to leave more room for your assessment as an expert so that we can hear more about your analysis of those facts in later parts of the paper as opposed to just reiterating some of the facts. Um, and so specifically, I would work to condense the section that starts with objectives on page 3 to the last full paragraph on page 10. Though that's the section that I would work to try to tighten that up a little bit. And then I would start the accomplishments section with the discussion that you provide on what's been achieved so far. And in that accomplishments section, make sure you address or assess all the things that you've laid out in the prior section. And what I mean by that is when I look at issue number 1, you don't reference the working groups or the cyber element when you talk about the accomplishments. And issue number 3 is actually absent in that next section. And then in issue number 2, when you talk about China and the Trilat, you conclude that not much has happened because PRC provocation hasn't really been present. I would suggest that you rethink this because in subsequent pages, you rightly highlight some of the things that they've agreed to or said regarding China and Taiwan. And I think those are really significant. Now, obviously, the trilaterally, the countries haven't, there's no actionable items that they've taken regarding China or Taiwan. But the fact that we see them getting closer to the same page regarding some of the language regarding on China and Taiwan, that's significant. And I think you should highlight that more. And so if you include that talk of threat perceptions, as I mentioned, this section then could be bolstered by a deeper discussion of why we may or may not see as much movement on China as we do elsewhere. Moving to your recommendations section, you have a lot of great ideas. And when I put my think tank hat on, I want more specificity. I want more details for greater clarity. Broadly speaking, across all the recommendations, I would ask you to think more about the rationale for each of the recommendations. Whenever you say that they should do something, I want you to think a little bit more about the reasons why. Why do you think they should do something? Not just because they've agreed to it, but what is the rationale for that? For example, you say they should do more exercises. When I read that, I think, okay, what kind of exercises? For what purpose? And broadly, what is the ultimate objective that more exercises would seek to foster? So it's just trying to string it out a little bit more to the logical conclusion that I'm not disagreeing that with your actual recommendations, but just a little bit more rationale for why you suggest the things you suggest. Because I do think having more clarity there would really strengthen what you already have, a lot of the recommendations that you have. Another area in the recommendations section is just rereading for or revising for clarity or understanding. And I'll give a couple examples here. When you talk about the need to improve missile warning data, you say that the ROC US and the Self-Defense Force data were different. But you didn't explain what the difference is or why that difference even matters. So something like that, just saying this is what the difference is and this is why it matters. Also, you talk about improving accuracy to 100% in terms of data sharing. Here too, I would say, what exactly is it that you're looking for? Is it an issue with protocols? Is it an issue with hardware not being able to talk to each other? Is it software? What exactly is the issue standing in the way of that 100% that you seek to achieve? And then in your section discussing the difficulty of sovereign states discussing info and intel if they're not an alliance, and then integrating data could be difficult. I'd just say here further clarity is needed because militaries and governments do that even when they're not allies. And so if there's if there's a reference that you want to cite regarding that, I think it would be helpful. And then finally, on your paper, I would say with the challenges, the part where you talk about Russia, North Korea, PRC, that discussion about the Northern Triangle, I didn't exactly understand what the challenge was. And so just further clarity on what exactly, how that challenges trilateralism. And then the last point would be, you're spot on with domestic politics. But what caught me in your discussion on domestic politics is you didn't reference South Korean politics post Yoon. And so you talked about US, you talked about Japan, and I was just wondering if there was a reason why. And then with Yasuo, I'm not going to go over the strengths in your paper, but let me focus on a number of quick issues here. I like the presentation of I like the breadth of areas that you cover when you go up front. It helps us understand really what's been agreed upon. But in your paper, you focus primarily on defense issues, but you don't explain why. And I feel that I'm not disagreeing with that, but it would just be helpful to say, we have this full array of issues that have been agreed upon, but I'm focusing on this for this reason. That could be because it's analytically important, it's policy relevant, I'm not sure. In your section on tasks to consider, the presentation is very clear, but there are some qualifications that I think are needed. When you talk about the strategic agenda, you provide a very good list of minilaterals that are already there, like Quad, AUKUS, and others. But these are not all the same. They're very different. They have very different purposes, which elicit different opportunities, different challenges. And so I think a qualification of some sort is needed that recognizes that. And then in your institutionalization section, I do think that having an expanded talk about historical examples could be useful here to help us understand what's worked in the past, what hasn't worked in the past, and what lessons are drawn for this. And when you talk about the joint statement not specifying specific reasons for institutionalization in the defense sector, you say existing measures need to be built upon in the paper. So providing more details on what exactly you mean by that would be useful. I had a comment about Alex not covering historical issues in your paper. Yasuo, you do provide a brief reference to a number of bilateral historical issues that could be challenging to trilateralism. You just briefly mentioned the Comfort Women Agreement, wartime labor, radar lock, export control, but there's no details or reference. And so for people who are not familiar with those issues, just having a citation of some sort that just references what that is, I think would be really helpful. And then I think the same is true in your discussion about foreign policy strategies. You talk about the US rebalance and Yoon's global pivotal state, but maybe a reference to what those are. You do the US, not so much Yoon. And then FOIP is absent. You don't really discuss FOIP. And then finally, let me just final couple thoughts here. You do a great job of laying out details of the Camp David Summit agreement, but I think you need a little tightening. I think, my comments for Alex, if you could provide more of your analysis and assessment of those agreements, I think that would be worthwhile, because it's the assessment to help understand what those mean is where I think the real juice is to squeeze. And there are times in the paper that it reads a lot about the US has pushed trilateralism, the US wants trilateral cooperation, but what gets missing sometimes is the South Korea and Japanese agency. Why do they want it? What's in it for them? What's the benefit for them? And so I think highlighting that a little bit more throughout the paper, I think that would be helpful. Okay, final two thoughts here. You talk about quasi-alliance. You mentioned it in your talk. You talk a lot about in your paper. I think the terminology, I think we need to think about it a little bit because you reference quasi-alliance light. You do provide a little bit of a definition, but I think it deserves more discussion. Why is that the relationship framing that you want to use for this relationship? Um, Maybe there's a different framing device out there. I'm not sure. Um, and then the focus of a lot of that section, it focuses almost exclusively on internal Japan's defense agreements. But you lay out the question about what are the elements or benchmarks for quasi-alliance defense cooperation. When I read that, I'm not sure if you meant to focus just on Japan, but you don't focus on sort of the other things in the region, maybe what other countries are doing, just what Japan's doing. If you did mean to focus just on Japan, maybe retitle the section. If not, broaden it to look at some others. I can talk offline with you about that. But let me stop there. Again, these were really great papers. I know I went into a lot of the weeds. A lot of that probably didn't make sense to a lot of you listening, but it was a really great opportunity, and thank you for letting me read these.
Thank you, Jeffrey. So I see both the panelists taking feverish notes as their discussion spoke. I wanted to give you, before we open up to audience Q&A here and online, a chance to maybe pick a few points that Jeffrey mentioned and give your response.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey, for that was very productive and constructive comments. Every word you spoke, so like I'm gonna be yeah. I should have, right? We have my Zoom, so so like 7 comments you made. For I won't be able to respond to all of those, but timeline, yes. You know, I found the source that in 1964, when China tested the first atomic bomb, the yield was equivalent to what they dropped on Hiroshima, about 2.5 kiloton, I think. But when China did that, I think I found the information from State Department, the archives of State Department, that uh, part of this is not an official statement, and this is like me speaking, right? But um, U.S. readjusted the AUR of the USFJ, so covering the Korean Peninsula. I read that at some point, but I cannot find it anymore. So that's why I think 1965 was the point when trilateral cooperation, at least the effort to really drive this trilateral cooperation, has started from the U.S. perspective. So I'll try to organize a bit more neatly, and also I see that as a first phase. The second phase was after when TCOC was there in 1998 after Daepodong, right? And the third phase was 2014 TISA after the third nuclear test of DPRK. And fourth phase is now Camp David. So I'm trying to categorize into 4 different phases, but I haven't really written about that in this paper. I'm going to do that, like according to a comment, and also accomplishments. Yeah, well, like I was organizing my writing again for this specific seminar, and I felt the same way. A lot of the repetition. Yeah, so I'll have to do that again. I'll have to move here and there, like in paragraphs. And about the recommendations, yes, first of all, the rationale for different recommendations, especially for the exercises. During Camp David, the 3 leaders agreed to expand both the scope and scale of the exercises, especially turning this exercise into multi-domain. Like, therefore, if we trace back to the last August, and then see the sort of the exercise that we conducted together until now, from what I saw, from what I've seen from the news, there are 3 exercises: 2 aerial and 1 naval, but no ground yet. but multi-domain means like ground, aerial, and the naval. But there is a certain political matter to really take into account between Korea and Japan in the context of ground exercise. But later on, I believe it will be happening sooner or later. So that is sort of the rationale I have. But like I wasn't able to really put this into the words, but I will do that afterwards. And recommendation for the real-time sharing missile data on DPRK. That was January when DPRK tested IRBM, and three of the I believe from the news what I saw was the three datas were different. The reason I'm not sure. It's I think it's not opened, but I think the level of sharing the data, level of information, level of data sharing among the three will be improving. It's not like, Korea is sharing 100% of their data with Japan or US, right? Or US or Japan. It's like, certain level of data they're going to share for this data sharing mechanism. So I think that will improve down the road. And I'll make it clear that in the writing as well. Lastly, about the domestic politics. Not sure if the you're talk. I think you're talking about general election coming like in 10 days, next week in Korea. There's a legislative election in Korea, and I'm not sure if that will really affect this trilateral cooperation or the policy, RK government policy towards the trilateral cooperation. So that's why I only mentioned Japanese and U.S. politics in my writing. But really, the last one, Northern Triangle. I think the challenges for the Northern Triangle. Uh, it's really up to China, I think. DPRK, Russia, like they had a dialogue recently, but that would not make triangle that would not complete the triangle. It's really up to China whether they want it or not. So if China wants it, like it will really be a problem, and the the issue, like a lot of people call it new Cold War, but if it's really up to China that will really set this sort of the northern versus southern triangle competition. So that's it for now, I think. Thank you very much for your comment.
Oh, okay, very quickly. Thank you, Jeffrey Dai Sensei, for your comments. Just I'm not going to cover all of it, but just quickly on the timeline. Why 1990s? So you could go all the way back to the Korean War, but the Cold War cooperation during the trilateral during the Cold War, trilateral cooperation was more like more U.S. Led indirect. Japan was not keen on having any direct security relationship with other a country besides the United States. But after the Cold War, 1990s, Japan has become more assertive, I guess, on developing security cooperation with other countries besides the United States, with and besides the United States. But also South Korea, we has democratized, economic developed, so it's more of an equal partner. So finally in the 1990s, we can face each other, mutually, like three partners, So that's where I put my first timeline for the trilateral we see now. Yeah. And but we do have some legacy, UNC Korean War issues as well. On what worked and what caused it to fail, or what worked. It's people always talk about, oh, it's the history issue, the Korea and Japan. Well, yes, okay, that's partly so, but it's also about strategic differences, the outlook. And Korea and Japan do have nuanced differences on China and all these other things. But when it works, it's when both the strategic outlook is converged and we have some way to manage the history issue. That's when it works. When it doesn't work is where we have a big gap and divergences between the strategic policies. And we couldn't figure out how to manage the history issue. That's when it fails. So the Yoon-Kishida relationship now, we're converged on both for the moment. But on domestic politics, so Japan, of course, is worried about how South Korean domestic politics will work out beyond Yoon administration. So, but Japan has always been steady on the trilateral cooperation. We never negated it, okay? But on the bilateral, it depends on who the partner is in South Korea. So that's the difference would be. On China, we don't have to have an equal threat perception, okay? Because it's always going to be different. But I think there is more overlap now on the Indo-Pacific on China. So that makes more room for more cooperation. And from Japan, yes, we'll cooperate on North Korea, but also we're looking to see if South Korea will cooperate more on the maritime security issues. So that's another area. Quasi-alliance, I'll think about that. Why did I focus on defense cooperation? My last point, because Clint asked me to do so. Because it's the economic panel for the economic is another panel, another set of papers, but also it's my area of expertise. And also it is the defense cooperation. We do so much, but it's so under institutionalized. So it's really the task now. Thank you.
Thank you for throwing me under the bus, Yasuyo. You rightfully so. When Jeffrey brought that up, I thought that's my doing. Yeah, I have to answer for that. So, Jeffrey, thank you for your wonderful comments. We spoke a little bit beforehand, but they align very much with my own, which I'll also provide you both in writing. But I'm happy they do align. And in posing, in providing your comments and posing some questions, you actually raised some of the questions that I was going to ask, and we got some good answers. But I might actually return to one that you asked, Jeffrey, about Korean and Japanese agency and why they want better trilateral relations. And so the commitment to consult document, really historic document in some ways, but it's very short. It's 2 paragraphs. And the whole second paragraph essentially focuses on what it is not, which is to say a replacement for the respective bilateral treaties between Japan and the US and the ROK and the US, both of which allies jealously guard the privileges and aspects of their alliances with Washington. So you've both alluded, Alex and Yasuo have alluded to this answer, but I might ask you to dig a little deeper on why, in fact, do Seoul and Tokyo want stronger trilateral relations?
I think Jeffrey also mentioned, I can tie Jeffrey's comment with Clint's because orientation of this cooperation, the direction wise, I think there must be a difference between the two. As Yasuo mentioned, yes, on China, the tone, right, the nuance difference between Korea and Japan. Think about the strategic environment, security landscape, and threat perception of Korea. It must be oriented towards the north, right? DPRK, nuclear missile provocation. So that's the orientation of the Korea, and also that was the main priority of the objectives for the trilateral cooperation from Korea perspective. Since I've done like few researches and writings on trilateral cooperation, I had a couple of chances to speak to the colleagues in both U.S. and Japan in this panel, right? And I learned, believe that the focus of U.S. and Japan on trilateral is more towards the Indo-Pacific, and of course, Korea's, as we declared in the Camp David, our focus is on the peninsula, but we're widening our interest and try to play a responsible stakeholder role in the region. In that regard, Korea is also trying to manage and maintain the peace and prosperity of in the Pacific. So I would say from Korea's perspective, yes, the primary focus is Korean Peninsula, DPRK, in terms of the trilateral cooperation, right? But also now it is trying to play a responsible role in the Indo-Pacific as well. The reason I'm saying this is Korea, a lot of people think Korea is just focusing on the DPRK in the trilateral setting, but that's not, I believe that is not true because what we've agreed in Camp David was the peace and prosperity of Indo-Pacific and also the Korean Peninsula and the in the global sense too. So what that is really Korea will try to play a bigger role and very role that international community uh, ask and also what we discussed with our partners in the trilateral cooperation.
Yeah, okay, so responding to what Clint asked, for Japan, what is a trilateral for? It's when you read the national security strategy documents, but basically it's twofold, and it's about North Korea. I mean, North Korea is targeting Japan and and Korea and so forth, in US as well. So, we need Korea and the US-Korea alliance. It is a strategic asset for Japan's security to have the chorus, the Korea-US alliance in place, get that steady, and then the coordination, because we're all involved. But second, the new dimension is the Indo-Pacific, and it's really welcome that the South Korea, produced its Indo-Pacific strategy, and it has shown interest in maritime security, sea lanes, and so forth. And South Korea does have the capability to do so. I mean, we already cooperate in Djibouti, the Aden area. So, the South Korea does have the capability to support maritime security as well. But they're in a dilemma there because North Korea is there, and how to divide your eggs into which basket. It's hard. It's a hard decision for South Korea, but it is cooperation with South Korea, trilateral, if and well, it is brought into the Indo-Pacific, which would include maritime security. So that would be another asset or addition to South Korea, the value of South Korea and the trilateral. But also, it's the second panel. It's about economic and tech supply chains. So that's another area where Japan would have interest with cooperation with South Korea and the trilateral as well. On the second point, commitment to consult, by the way, yeah, that second paragraph, it talks about what the trilateral is not, but it's also out of expediency. We're trying, I think the governments were worried about how to explain that commitment to consult. It's not a legal document, but some people domestically might misunderstand that that's a legal document, but it's only a political commitment. So that's why they included the second paragraph. But also it's about a counter argument to those who say it's an agent NATO, which it is not. So, there's many practical dimensions to that second paragraph. Okay.
Multiple audiences they're addressing. Yeah. Well, I have, of course, more questions, but I want to get to the audience. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand and we can bring a mic to you. Oh, I see one right away.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Lucy. I'm a grad student here. One of the papers I'm writing is actually about the Japan-South Korea relationship right now. So I think this panel is very helpful and timely for me personally. I wanted to hear your opinions about the role of resolving the historical issues between Japan and South Korea in stabilizing the alliance for the future. I know it doesn't seem like your papers address that, and I think it's quite important, especially because of how the relationship in the past has suffered because of disagreements over how to handle the situation, and because the current improvement in the relationship has been due largely in part to Yoon's concession to Japan that they would not rely on them to pay back some of the forced labor workers, and they would instead look to South Korean companies' voluntary contributions. And I think in general, while stabilizing the relationship in the present is incredibly important in addressing the current threats we're facing, I think also ignoring the past is unwise. And I think it would also, aid in, like I said, stabilizing the relationship for the future, which is incredibly vital.
Could you maybe restate the question?
Yeah, so what do you think about the role of resolving the historical disputes between Japan and Korea in stabilizing the relationship for the future?
It's important. It's if we want to go, if Korea and Japan wants to proceed with security, we do have to address at the same time the history issue, because it's about emotions, it's about identity, but it's a set, you know. I mean, having common identities is also important for alliances. It's about democracy and, free market, all that, but it also includes bilateral issues. Okay, so identity and interest are both important in proceeding with strategic relations.
So I think that's more of the so we're international relations scholars, and of course there are the scholars who really focus on the Korea-Japan historical disputes, usually the historians. But so that's probably out of scope of our research. But if I may, I think for both in Korea and Japan, it's more of a domestic politics. You say this is a bilateral dispute, but it actually is a domestic politics because the leaders are the one who decide, right? The agents are the one who decide the foreign policy. And this is a foreign policy between the countries. And my second point is, I believe the trilateral security cooperation would help, the Korea to Japan to build another level of the relations on a different ground. So that will really help to heal the relations between the Korea and Japan.
I noticed the sun retreated and the storm rolled in just as you asked the question about historical issues. Any other questions in the audience? Okay, over here.
Thank you.
Oh, over here as well. Okay.
Oh, should I stand up? Hi, I'm an undergrad at the Jackson School. Thank you all for coming. I did want to touch upon something that I didn't read the paper, unfortunately, but it's something that was brought up on Professor Lee's paper about the importance of data and kind of minimizing information asymmetry within the trilateral cooperation. So one thing I wanted to bring up was the possibility of Japan entering the Five Eyes, and that's been a venture that's been going on for the last year, and there's been a lot of talk about it. If Japan does succeed entering the Five Eyes, that would what seems like would basically induce even further information asymmetry within the trilateral. And at that point, do you speculate, or any of the panels speculate, that South Korea would too venture to or endeavor to join the Five Eyes? And also a follow-up question, I suppose, is why is there such a hesitation when it comes to, or why is there a lack of a conversation surrounding inviting South Korea to join the Five Eyes, but all the buzz around Japan joining the Five Eyes? What is the difference there between Japan and South Korea? Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you both for your very thoughtful questions. Five Eyes. First of all, data. Level of the data intelligence they share within the Five Eyes is different from what they share among the trilateral cooperation, I believe, right? And it's only been there for like 7 months. Of course, back in 2014, when they did the TISA, the way it worked was basically Korean army, Korean military giving information to USFK, right? And the USFK delivering that information to Indo-Pacific Command, which is the liaison, right? And then Indo-Pacific Command delivering information to USFJ, and then USFJ2 South Defense Force, vice versa, right? It took like 3 different steps. So when US Indo-Pacific Command wanted to deliver information received from Korea to Japan, it will have to double check with the Korean military. That's what I understand about TISA. It became much more simple for the after the trilateral among the 3 after Camp David, but I'm not sure how much simpler it got. But I'm sure Five Eyes has much more complex but simple way of exchanging information among the 5. And if Japan were to be invited and to enter Five Eyes, it's always if you look at this, when Quad first came up, right, in 2018, I believe, and people talking about would Korea join or Japan join, right? And if Korea joins, would Japan follow? If Japan joins, if would Korea follow? The same discussions over like any other multilateral framework in the Pacific, including AUKUS and the Five Eyes. But I'm not sure if Korea would be joining Five Eyes or would be invited to join Five Eyes. But its yardstick is always RK-US alliance. Whatever it will strengthen the alliance, I think Korea will be open to join the multilateral framework. But it really depends on the that period, the specific political environment, both domestic and international.
Okay, good question, both of you. So Five Eyes is a very different topic from once again, the radar data sharing. And for Five Eyes in Japan, it's a high hurdle. Japan needs to fix its information security structure. Okay, and I'm hoping that Jeffrey might comment a little bit more on Five Eyes in Japan. But the radar data sharing, it's a small area of military, operational information. Okay, and it's a really sensitive issue when you talk to self-defense forces people, but the fact that they did it is a feat. It's a big feat. But it's still, as CT says, trilateral information sharing. It goes Korea, US, Japan. Okay. But what's different is now, before there was a time lag still, but now Korea and Japan has decided to share that US Indo-PACOM computer, whatever screen. So it's more, you can save time. Okay, but we just started, so there's going to be differences, and still, it's a very sensitive area. But the fact that they linked it, the data link is one small step. But Five Eyes, perhaps if Jeffrey wants to comment or not.
I can give a quick. Yeah, I can give a quick comment on that. With Five Eyes, I know that the issue of Five Eyes comes up a lot, and there's a lot of advocates out there for Japan and Korea being a member of Five Eyes. But the issue of Five Eyes, there's a lot of things there. There's a lot of different kinds of intelligence, and when you become a member of Five Eyes, there's questions about your intelligence collection abilities, and by being a member, you share. The other members know what abilities and capabilities what you have. How do you collect your intelligence? What kind of quality intelligence you have, and also there's an overriding question about why do you need to know, and so Japan, if becomes a member of Five Eyes, the overarching issue besides the information security issue is why. What would Japan do with the information if it was, or the intel if it was a member? But the overriding issue, and it's not to be minimized, is the handling of intelligence, and there are real issues on the Japanese side about how they're handling classified information, and that's been the primary sticking point.
I think Dr. Ha had a two-finger.
Well, thank you very much. Very interesting presentations and particularly discussions. I learned a great deal from three participants. My general question is, to what extent has the Camp David based kind of a trilateral relationship been changing bilateral relationship between Japan or Korea and the United States? Particularly in terms of perception of the United States. In relation to that, neither of you talked about the possible election of Trump for president, and how would both Japan and Korea respond to President Trump in case he's elected? And then the last question is about North Korea. You don't have to answer if you don't have any time, but somehow neither of you, both of you are very silent about North Korean issue here. I am wondering whether there has been any kind of a discussion which reached some kind of agreement on how to view the current status of North Korea's nuclear programs, because we all know that there are divergent views already coming out. That is, on the one hand, one group of people have been arguing that we inevitably need to recognize North Korea as the nuclear state. In fact, they say that's the shortcut to even denuclearization. On the other hand, somehow when I check out the State Department the internet, they're still talking about denuclearization of North Korea. So I don't know what's your take on this?
So you have to give rapid fire responses to the Trump factor and North Korean denuclearization, or accepting North Korea as a nuclear weapon state. So if you could solve those two intractable problems in 30 seconds, please have at it.
Response. Thank you, Dr. Ha. If it is a Trump, we're going to be ready for any scenario, right? So Biden, Trump. But if it is the Trump Republican administration, it's going to be more burden sharing talks, I think, in many areas. So that's my take on it. And on North Korea, we have to keep denuclearization of Korean as a goal, because we are NPT members and we will never take that goal. But of course, we have to be practical. Okay, so de facto, yes, but never de jure of any North Korean nuclear state. Thank you.
Right. Deep here. I'm sure Professor Han knows much more than I do. I'll have to answer to this. So for the denuclearization, CVI, the complete denuclearization of North Korea should be the goal, right? The process we'll have to think about it, but the importance is it should be the complete CVID of the denuclearization. But for Trump factor, yes, trilateral cooperation, I think, will be sustained under any administration, because nation's objective is to maximize its national interest. Trilateral cooperation from any party, Korea, Japan, US, is the mechanism that can sustain one's position and strengthen its international position, regional position in the Indo-Pacific and the globe. So I think under any administration will be under the transactional manner too. It will be sustained, I think. Yeah.
I'm sorry we are out of time, but we could have an opportunity to chat afterwards. I do want to make sure we adhere to our schedule as originally stated. So we have a brief about 6-minute break between this and the second panel. But I want to, before we close, just thank again Dr. Hornung, Dr. Sakata, and Dr. Lee for their wonderful comments writing. And also keep an eye out for Korea Policy in mid-May, because their finished, polished papers will be published at that time.